Good afternoon, Year 8. Welcome to today's history lesson. This is your recorded lesson and our second one on the atomic bomb, following on from yesterday. Okay, so yesterday we looked at what the motives were for America dropping the atomic bomb, and today we're going to actually look at whether we think that America was right to do so and whether it was the correct decision. Okay, so we're going to weigh up and evaluate arguments for and against dropping the bombs and have a little bit of research time on that, and then we're going to come at the end of the lesson to reach a final judgment on whether or not America did the right thing and they were correct to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So if you just pause the video, you can write down the date, write down the title, which is "Was the dropping of the A-bomb correct?" and then you'll be ready to move on and get started on the lesson. So write the date and do the title, please. Right guys, by now you should have the date and title written down in your books. Once you've done that, can you write the subheading there in bold? Should the US have dropped the atomic bomb? Okay, so that's going to be the focus of this first task. Should the USA have dropped the bomb? So can we all write that little subheading there and make sure it's there in our books? Okay. Once we've done that, I'd like us to do a for and against table there as seen on the screen. So one line down the middle, for on one side, against on the other. And so if we could all draw that, and then we'll go through over the next two slides looking at different pieces of information and decide whether they are for dropping the bomb or they are against dropping the bomb. So over the next few slides, we're going to be filling in that table with information and deciding whether we think they are for dropping the bomb or against dropping the bomb. So pause the video now, draw out the table, for on one side, against on the other, and then you are ready to carry on and get stuck into the next part of the lesson. Pause the video now. Right, moving on. On this slide, there are four pieces of information. I'll read through them. You have to decide whether to write them in the for section of your table. So do they support dropping the bomb or against? Are they against dropping the bomb? Okay, so I'll read through each four and then we'll pause the video and write them in the correct area on our table. Okay, so number one, the Japanese have been very cruel to prisoners of war and some Americans believed they deserve to be taught a lesson. So do we think that's for or against? Number two, at Hiroshima, over 80,000 citizens died as a result of the explosion, and many more were to later die as a result of radiation. 70,000 of the city's 78,000 buildings were destroyed, and at Nagasaki, 40,000 people died. So is that for dropping the bomb, or is that against dropping the bomb? Number three, the bombs could have been tested on an abandoned island before they were dropped on cities. Japanese people could have been forced to watch these bombings, and told if they did not surrender, these would be used on their country. Demonstrations such as this would have meant the Japanese would have surrendered before any atomic bombs were dropped. Okay, so maybe they could have let the Japanese know the power that they did have before they dropped it. Is that for? Is it against? And finally, for this slide, number four, the Americans believed Japan would never surrender. If the bomb had not been dropped, thousands of American lives could have been lost in an invasion against Japan to try and stop the war. So is number four for or against dropping the bomb? Okay. So pause the video here, guys, and for each one of those, write it in the for or against, depending on what you think. So is each one of those points supporting dropping the bomb, or is it against dropping the bomb? Pause the video now and fill in the table. Well done, guys, for making it this far. By now, we should have four information pieces in our table, either for or against dropping the bomb. These are the next five. Okay, so this is the final slide of information. It's going to follow the same path. I'll read them out. You decide whether they're for or against, and then we'll pause the video and write it in the correct side of our table. Okay, so number five, it has been argued that more Japanese people would have lost their lives in an American invasion than from the atomic bombs anyway. Okay, so is this for or against dropping the bombs? Number six, dropping an atomic bomb on an unpopulated island would have been hugely expensive, and the USA only had a limited supply of atomic bombs. It would have been too expensive to drop a bomb on a non-populated island to scare the Japanese. The USA had to drop their bombs on cities. So is that for or against? Number seven, before the bombings took place, the Japanese had already told the Russians they wanted to surrender. However, President Truman of the USA insisted that the Japanese must agree to all of his terms, which included removing the Japanese emperor, which the Japanese refused to do. Truman would not allow this. If Truman had been more flexible with his terms, then the Japanese may have surrendered without any of the atomic bombs needing to happen. Okay, so what do we think for that one? Number eight, The Japanese were well known for using kamikaze suicide pilots who flew planes into their ships. I know we discussed that on yesterday's lesson, guys, kamikaze suicide pilots. Japanese soldiers were so courageous and determined they would rather commit suicide than surrender. There were 5,000 of these kamikaze fighters, and it seemed unlikely an invasion of Japan would be successful against an army which included kamikaze pilots. Okay, and finally, number 9, the Japanese army was made up of 5 million men. President Truman did not want to risk enormous American casualties by launching an invasion of Japan. The atomic bomb was a way of ending the war quickly. Okay, guys, 5 pieces of information there. Pause the video now. Do they support dropping the bomb? If so, write them in the for section of your table, or are they against dropping the bomb? And if so, write them in the against half of your table. Okay, so pause the video now, fill in that table. Hopefully by then you should have a nice full table which will help us on the last task, which we will do in a minute. Right, guys, this is our final task, and it's going to be a little bit of a writing exercise to see what we think altogether. Okay, so was the USA in fact right to drop the atomic bombs on Japan? Okay, this writing task is going to consist of 3 paragraphs. I'd like you to use evidence in particularly the first 2 ones to support them. Okay, I'll put some sentence starters on the board for you, or on the screen rather, to help you out. So for paragraph 1, you could start it off by saying it could be argued that dropping the atomic bomb was the right thing to do because. For that one, you're going to be looking back at your table and looking at the evidence that's for dropping the bomb, and you can pick out the most important evidence, or the evidence that you think is the best, to go in there and explain why that supports dropping the bomb. Paragraph 2, on the other hand, it could be argued that dropping the atomic bomb is the wrong thing to do because. There you would be looking into your table at the against section, pick out the evidence which you think is most convincing and explain why it's against dropping the bomb. So there are going to be 2 really good paragraphs there, guys. P paragraphs where we're explaining our evidence. Okay, and then finally, paragraph 3. Overall, I think it was right or wrong thing to do because. Okay, and then I'd like to see some explanation why you've come to your decision. All right, so paragraph 3, you have to make your mind up, decide whether you think it was right, whether you think it was wrong, and then explain why you think that. Okay, you should spend a good amount of time on this, guys. So 15 to 20 minutes of writing time here to try and write a good chunky paragraphs with good evidence in there, with good explanation as well. Once you've completed that writing, I'd like you to upload your work to Satchel, so me and Mr. Simpson can have a little look through it and just check that you're on the right track. And once you've completed that, guys, you can go off, have a good weekend, and I'll see you back at school next week. So that will be the end of the recorded lesson for this week.